In the Caribbean, where images of turquoise waters and bustling markets dominate global imagination, another story unfolds out of sight. Behind the beaches, in crowded urban neighborhoods and along rural border crossings, thousands of children live under the shadow of trafficking and exploitation. This is not an isolated phenomenon. It is systemic, deeply entrenched, and devastating in its impact. In this investigation, we focus on three countries at the epicenter of the crisis: Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica. Together, they reveal the human cost of a crime that strips children of safety, dignity, and future. Child trafficking is defined as the recruitment, transportation, harboring, or receipt of a child for purposes of exploitation. The exploitation takes many forms: forced labor, sexual servitude, coerced criminal activity, and in Haiti's case, even child recruitment into armed gangs. According to the U.S. State Department's Trafficking in Persons Report 2024, all three countries remain heavily affected, with children trafficked both domestically and across borders. In Haiti, the problem is acute. A country already in turmoil from poverty and political instability, it has become a breeding ground for exploitation. In February 2025, Reuters reported that UNICEF warned of children's bodies becoming a battleground amid a surge in sexual violence in gang controlled neighborhoods of Port au Prince. Armed groups, emboldened by the absence of state control, have turned children into instruments of violence. The Associated Press in November 2024 confirmed a 70% increase in child recruitment by gangs in just a few years, with victims as young as 8. Trafficking in Haiti also thrives in the form of the Restavek system, a practice where impoverished families send their children to live with wealthier households in hopes of a better life. But in reality, many of these children endure abuse, neglect, and exploitation as unpaid domestic servants. Human Rights Watch has documented how gangs and traffickers prey on the vulnerability of children left without protection, offering food or shelter in exchange for dangerous tasks, from carrying weapons to smuggling contraband. Just across the border, in the Dominican Republic, the story takes a different shape, but with equally disturbing contours. The country functions as both a destination and transit hub for trafficked children, many of them Haitian migrants. Children crossing into the Dominican Republic often become invisible, undocumented, and unprotected, prime targets for exploitation. In September 2024, Dominican Today reported that police in Bavaro dismantled a trafficking ring, rescuing 20 exploited women, including minors. This case, while shocking, is not unique. It illustrates how trafficking intersects with tourism, migration, and organized networks. Earlier research by the International Justice Mission revealed that in some Dominican cities, roughly 10% of people in commercial sex were children, and nearly a quarter of minors working publicly in streets and parks were exposed to sexual exploitation. The Dominican Republic has made progress, but as the U.S. State Department TIP report 2024 notes, gaps remain in enforcement, particularly in rural regions and among migrant children. The cross border trafficking of Haitian youth into Dominican tourist areas remains one of the most entrenched patterns in the Caribbean. Turning to Jamaica, a country better known for reggae, beaches, and cultural exports, the trafficking problem reveals itself in quieter but equally troubling ways. Jamaica functions simultaneously as a source, transit, and destination for trafficked children. Victims are forced into sexual exploitation, labor, or used in illicit activities. Recent local cases highlight how trafficking operates close to home. In March 2025, the Jamaica Gleaner reported that a mother in Manchester was charged with trafficking her 13-year-old daughter, knowingly facilitating her sexual exploitation. A month earlier, Another Gleaner report detailed the case of a man in St. Catherine who pled guilty to a string of charges, including trafficking, incest, and child pornography, against his own daughters.
It's a dark pathway shattering lives. One life shattered, a 14-year-old girl brought to Jamaica from Haiti in 2010. She met a Jamaican man where she lived with her mother and 7 siblings under poor circumstances. The man, a fisherman, invited her to Jamaica, which he said
was a place where beautiful and kind people lived.
But as put by head of the Anti-Trafficking in Persons Vice Squad, Detective Inspector Kemisha Gordon, right here in that same Jamaica, human trafficking...
It is hidden in plain sight. It is not readily, detected.
The girl refused his offer. 3 days later, he put the same offer to her mother. Her mother's words,
"I leave it to her."
The girl said she then realized it was a good opportunity to go to school, get a job, and help her family. That time, her response was,
"Yes."
3 months in, things fell apart. She was locked inside with the children and was told to clean. Bathroom, kitchen, day in, day out, stuck in a painful loop. She would be awake by 6 a.m. the latest and back to sleep by 9 p.m. There was no payment.
Meanwhile, in January 2025, the Jamaica Observer warned that online predators are on the rise, as experts pointed to a surge in grooming and recruitment of children through social media platforms. These reports underscore the reality that child trafficking in Jamaica is not a hidden foreign problem. It is happening within families, communities, and digital spaces. The U.S. State Department TIP report 2024 notes this same trend, highlighting traffickers' increasing use of technology to target children and the persistent vulnerability of marginalized rural youth. Across these 3 countries, the threads of exploitation are clear. In Haiti, extreme poverty and gang control. In the Dominican Republic, migration pressures and tourism demand. In Jamaica, digital grooming and familial complicity. Each case reported in local and international media is not an isolated tragedy, but part of a much larger pattern. The statistics are sobering, but they tell only part of the story. Behind each figure in a TIP report, behind every case study in a UNICEF bulletin, lies a child's stolen future. These are not nameless victims. They are sons, daughters, brothers, and sisters whose rights have been systematically stripped away. The Caribbean is often portrayed as paradise, but beneath the postcard images lies a hidden crisis, a crisis that demands attention, accountability, and action. To understand child trafficking in the Caribbean, we must examine not only its existence, but also its underlying causes and the methods traffickers use to exploit children. In Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica, the drivers are poverty, instability, migration pressures, and systemic weaknesses. The mechanisms traffickers employ range from coercion and deception to the exploitation of digital platforms and tourism industries. In Haiti, extreme poverty is perhaps the greatest driver. According to the U.S. State Department's 2024 Trafficking in Persons report, nearly 6 in 10 Haitians live below the poverty line. Families often lack access to basic services, leaving children vulnerable. Some parents, desperate to provide opportunities, send their children into the rest of X system, domestic servitude in wealthier households. Instead of education and care, many endure abuse, neglect, and forced labor. Beyond household exploitation, gangs now play a central role in trafficking. In February 2025, Reuters reported that UNICEF warned of children's bodies becoming a battleground with armed groups in Port-au-Prince using sexual violence as a weapon. By November 2024, the Associated Press had documented a 70% increase in children recruited by gangs, some as young as 8. They are promised food, protection, or survival, but in reality, They are coerced into carrying weapons, smuggling contraband, or serving as lookouts in violent conflicts. The vulnerability does not stop at Haiti's borders. In August 2025, the Haitian Times revealed a trafficking ring dismantled in Ouanaminthe, a border town, where children were lured with false promises of work across the Dominican Republic frontier. The arrests highlighted how traffickers exploit porous borders, undocumented status, and lack of legal protections to shuttle children between two countries with vastly different economies. On the Dominican side, trafficking is fueled by tourism and migration. The Dominican Republic is both a destination and a transit hub for children, particularly Haitian migrants. These children often arrive with no papers, no networks, and no resources, conditions traffickers exploit immediately. In September 2024, Dominican Today reported that police rescued 20 exploited women and girls from a trafficking network in Bavaro, a major tourist hub. This case exposed how organized rings operate in plain sight, blending into industries that serve millions of visitors each year. The International Justice Mission has documented how commercial sexual exploitation of children persists in urban centers, with studies showing that roughly 10% of individuals in commercial sex were minors. In public spaces such as streets, parks, and beaches, nearly a quarter of children were found vulnerable to solicitation and exploitation. The mechanisms are varied. Some children are recruited with false job offers in hospitality or entertainment, while others are coerced with threats, violence, or debt bondage. The Dominican Republic's proximity to Haiti and its reliance on tourism make it particularly susceptible. Traffickers know that foreign demand, combined with local vulnerabilities, creates a profitable system. As the TIP Report 2024 warns, legal frameworks exist, but enforcement and victim identification remain uneven, leaving many children unprotected. In Jamaica, trafficking mechanisms are increasingly digital. The U.S. State Department TIP Report 2024 notes that traffickers now exploit social media and messaging apps to recruit children. Predators pose as friends, romantic partners, or employers, grooming children before coercing them into exploitation. These cases underscore how economic desperation, social breakdown, and predatory behavior intersect, even within families. Rural poverty is another driver in Jamaica. Children in marginalized communities often leave school early, seeking work in informal or tourism related sectors. Traffickers target these environments, knowing that children with limited supervision or opportunities are more easily manipulated. Some are pushed into commercial sex, others into domestic servitude, and some into drug trafficking or gang related activity. Across all three nations, the mechanisms traffickers use share common features. They manipulate vulnerabilities, whether economic, social, or familial. They promise opportunity, but deliver exploitation. They use coercion and threats to maintain control. In Haiti, the lure may be survival in gang dominated neighborhoods. In the Dominican Republic, it may be a job in tourism. In Jamaica, it could begin as a message on a smartphone. The drivers are equally interconnected. Poverty strips families of options. Migration leaves children undocumented and invisible. Weak enforcement allows traffickers to operate with impunity. And societal tolerance or silence normalizes the exploitation of children. The consequences of these drivers and mechanisms are devastating. Children lose education, safety, and dignity. Families are broken. Communities are destabilized. Economies are robbed of their most vital resource, human potential. The impacts of child trafficking in the Caribbean cannot be measured only in statistics. Each case represents not just a crime, but a chain reaction of trauma and loss. The effects ripple outward, from the individual child to families to entire communities, and ultimately to national economies. In Haiti, the consequences are especially dire. When children are recruited into gangs, they are robbed not only of their safety, but of their entire future. According to the Associated Press in late 2024, the number of children drawn into armed groups soared by 70% in just a few years. These children often serve as soldiers, couriers, or victims of sexual violence. As Reuters reported in February 2025, UNICEF described children's bodies as battlegrounds in gang controlled neighborhoods. The trauma of sexual assault, forced labor, and exposure to violence leaves scars that extend across generations. For many Haitian families, the impacts are both emotional and practical. Parents who hope for safety or opportunity instead face the devastation of losing their children to exploitation. Communities become destabilized as children who should be in schools or workplaces are instead drawn into cycles of violence and abuse. Economically, Haiti loses vital human capital. Children who might one day become professionals, entrepreneurs, or leaders are instead lost to a life of trauma or premature death. The border region between Haiti and the Dominican Republic amplifies these harms. In August 2025, the Haitian Times reported the arrests of traffickers in Ouanaminta, a town at the frontier. Haitian children promised jobs across the border were instead trafficked into exploitation. These cross border cases often leave victims doubly invisible, undocumented in a foreign country, and isolated from their families. For the children, the impact is isolation and fear. For communities, it is the erosion of trust and security in the very act of migration, something so many families depend on to survive. Inside the Dominican Republic, the consequences of trafficking extend into the heart of its tourism industry. In September 2024, Dominican Today reported that police dismantled a trafficking ring in Bavaro, rescuing 20 exploited women and minors. These rescues highlight the individual harm, children subjected to coercion and abuse, but they also reveal the broader risks. The presence of trafficking networks undermines the safety of tourist hubs, jeopardizes the country's reputation, and corrodes local trust in institutions. The International Justice Mission documented that in some Dominican cities, around 10% of people in commercial sex were minors. This reality means that communities must live with the normalization of child exploitation. For survivors, the trauma is not easily healed. Many face stigma, mental health struggles, and limited reintegration opportunities. For the Dominican economy, the problem is twofold. While traffickers profit, the state must bear the costs of enforcement, social services, and lost productivity from children whose lives have been derailed. In Jamaica, the impacts are similarly layered. Recent cases highlight how trafficking fractures families from within. Socially, this creates ripple effects. Children who experience such betrayal often struggle with lifelong trust issues, depression, and post traumatic stress. Communities that hear of such cases are left with fear and suspicion, further weakening social cohesion. The Jamaica Observer in January 2025 warned that online predators are increasingly targeting children, fueling a sense of insecurity among families already grappling with economic challenges. The U.S. State Department TIP report 2024 adds another layer. Trafficked children in Jamaica are often stigmatized when they return to their communities, blamed for their exploitation instead of supported. This stigma compounds the trauma and reduces the likelihood of reintegration. Economically, Jamaica also suffers. Children removed from school and forced into exploitation cannot contribute productively to the workforce. The costs of addressing trafficking, law enforcement, judicial proceedings, victim services drain limited state resources. Tourism, a key pillar of Jamaica's economy, risks reputational harm if trafficking cases continue to surface in the media. Across Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica, the personal and social impacts of child trafficking are devastating. Children endure physical abuse, psychological trauma, and a loss of education and opportunity. Families are fractured, sometimes complicit, sometimes powerless. Communities lose trust, cohesion, and safety. Economies suffer the loss of future productivity and the costs of enforcement and rehabilitation. The broader regional impact is equally concerning. Trafficking undermines the rule of law, erodes trust in governments, and weakens institutions already struggling with corruption or underfunding. When citizens see traffickers operating with impunity, confidence in law enforcement collapses. When victims face stigma instead of support, cycles of silence and exploitation deepen. Perhaps most tragically, trafficking in these countries robs the Caribbean of its future. The children of today are the leaders, workers, and innovators of tomorrow. Every child lost to trafficking represents not just an individual tragedy, but a setback for entire nations striving for stability and growth. Child trafficking is not an unstoppable force. Across Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica, there are efforts underway by governments, law enforcement, NGOs, and international partners to fight back against this hidden crisis. Yet, progress is uneven and the road ahead remains long. In Haiti, combating trafficking is especially difficult in the face of instability and gang dominance. But authorities and international organizations are attempting to intervene. UNICEF has been vocal in highlighting the plight of children. In February 2025, as Reuters reported, UNICEF called attention to sexual violence against children in Port-au-Prince, describing them as the battleground of gang wars. This kind of international spotlight is critical. It pressures both the Haitian government and foreign donors to respond. Law enforcement in Haiti has also taken steps. In August 2025, the Haitian Times reported the arrest of traffickers in Wanaminthe, exposing a network smuggling children across the border into the Dominican Republic. While these arrests highlight the potential of policing to disrupt trafficking rings, they also underline the challenges: porous borders, lack of resources, and widespread corruption. Without sustained institutional reform, arrests risk being only temporary victories. International agencies continue to play a key role in Haiti. The TIP Report 2024 notes that NGOs often shoulder the burden of victim support, providing shelters, medical care, and legal assistance where the state cannot. But with gangs expanding control, even NGOs face danger. The effort to protect Haiti's children is ongoing, but fragile.
Well, Amy, the Dominican Republic is a hotbed for human trafficking, and it has been for years. But it wasn't until one upstate man went there and saw the issue with his own eyes that he decided he needed to do something.
That was my first experience of seeing what human trafficking looks like in the third world.
Persuaded by a friend to visit the Dominican Republic, Jack Eason says he saw something that could not be unseen.
I saw, young girls, 10, 11, 12 years old, who have been made up and are out on the streets.
In the poverty-stricken Caribbean nation where children are often taught to sell themselves for money, human trafficking is a thriving industry.
I got on the plane and said, okay, I cannot go home, and doing nothing is not an option now.
Eason is the executive director of the Crossover Cups mission, which helps those children before they're picked up by traffickers.
In the Dominican Republic, efforts have been more visible and at times more successful. The International Justice Mission, IJM, partnered with local authorities to target child sex trafficking in tourist hubs. Their long-term program led to a groundbreaking 78% reduction in child sex trafficking and a seven-fold increase in arrests of perpetrators. This shows what is possible when governments, civil society, and international organizations collaborate with urgency and focus. Yet, New cases show the work is far from complete. In September 2024, Dominican Today reported that police rescued 20 women and minors from a trafficking network in Bavaro. The raid underscored that traffickers adapt quickly, using tourism driven demand to sustain exploitation. Still, the successful rescue highlights that enforcement, when prioritized, can save lives. The U.S. TIP Report 2024 praises the Dominican Republic for increased prosecutions, but warns of gaps in victim identification, particularly among Haitian migrant children. These children, often undocumented, remain largely invisible to authorities. Until those gaps are addressed, traffickers will continue to find fertile ground. Jamaica, too, has begun to strengthen its response.
Jamaica's first child-friendly anti-human trafficking facility has opened. The facility has been established through a $6.7 million partnership between the Jamaican government and the United States through its Department of State's Trafficking in Persons office. The child-friendly space is located at the upper level of the Falmouth Police Station. The facility will operate with a staff complement that includes a psychiatrist, trained counselors, and male and female police officers with specialized training in dealing with victims of human trafficking.
The Jamaica Constabulary Force has commended the work of the National Task Force Against Trafficking in Persons, which has been working to coordinate government responses, train officers, and raise awareness. The TIP report 2024 notes that Jamaica has increased its investigations and there have been successful prosecutions, including the recent high-profile cases of trafficking reported by the Jamaica Gleaner in Manchester and St. Catherine. Still, challenges remain. The Jamaica Observer, in its January 2025 coverage, warned of the growing threat of online predators. Tackling this new frontier requires specialized digital investigations and cross-border cooperation with international law enforcement, since many online exploiters operate outside Jamaica. Without investment in cyber capabilities, children remain at risk in the digital space. Public awareness campaigns have also been a growing part of Jamaica's strategy. Community groups, churches, and NGOs are working to educate parents and children about the dangers of trafficking. Victim support services, however, remain limited, and survivors often face stigma. As the TIP Report 2024 points out, comprehensive reintegration services are critical if survivors are to rebuild their lives and avoid re-victimization. Across the region, the fight against trafficking faces common obstacles: underfunded institutions, corruption, porous borders, and persistent demand for exploitation. But there are also signs of hope. The IJM's success in the Dominican Republic shows that coordinated, well-resourced interventions can yield measurable progress. The Haitian border arrests demonstrate that even in fragile states, traffickers can be disrupted. The Jamaican prosecutions prove that laws, when enforced, can hold perpetrators accountable. International cooperation remains vital. U.S. and international aid programs provide training, technical support, and funding for victim services. NGOs continue to raise awareness, lobby governments, and provide safe spaces for survivors. Local communities, through activism, reporting, and education, remain on the front lines. The task ahead is daunting, but not impossible. Ending child trafficking in the Caribbean requires consistent enforcement, cross-border collaboration, investment in victim services, and the courage to confront demand, whether it comes from local abusers, international tourists, or online predators. Ultimately, the fight is not only about laws and arrests, it is about restoring childhoods. Every child rescued from exploitation represents a victory not just for law enforcement or NGOs, but for the region itself. Every conviction sends a signal that children are not commodities. every reintegrated survivor proves that healing is possible. Child trafficking in the Caribbean is not just a statistic in a government report, nor a headline in an international newspaper. It is a daily reality that destroys lives, families, and futures. Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Jamaica are at the center of this struggle, but the issue crosses borders, affecting the entire region. The Caribbean is a region known for resilience, for creativity, and for community. In facing child trafficking, it must bring all those strengths to bear. The road will be long, but the alternative, silence and inaction, means surrendering generations of children to exploitation. That is a cost no nation can afford. This has been Caribbean Files. Thank you for joining us in this investigation. If you found this report valuable, help us keep these stories alive. Like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it so others can understand the hidden crisis facing the Caribbean. And we want to hear from you. What do you think is the biggest barrier to stopping child trafficking in the Caribbean? Lack of enforcement, poverty, corruption, or something else? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters in this conversation.